Hello everyone, this is Sebastian Müller from yWorks. I'm the technical lead at yWorks and I would like to introduce you to yFiles for HTML, our JavaScript HTML5 solution for diagramming in the browser. First, we start by navigating to our homepage and choose the right product, which in this case is yFiles for HTML. And then we click this nice orange button over here to evaluate the program. Well, please enter your data and click the send button, and you will receive an email that will have a link included which allows you to download the software. I've done this already. Here it is. You'll get a zip file. Just extract it. And the first thing you should navigate your browser to is the README HTML file. Here's the contents. It gives you a short introduction, what's inside the package, the demos, the tutorials, and of course the documentation and the library, what you can do with it, and how to contact us if you're in case of any questions. Here you'll find all of the the extensive source code applications. They can be run directly from the file system, fully interactive, no server required anyhow. Also, there's a link to the documentation, of course, and the Getting Started chapter. The documentation contains an extensive developer's guide with lots and lots of chapters, and the full list of APIs available in yFiles. But let's see what's in the package. Our recommendation for working with yFiles for HTML is using a modern IDE like WebStorm. WebStorm is available from JetBrains. It's an extensive JavaScript IDE that you can evaluate and download from their homepage. I've done this already. And here it is. Once WebStorm starts up, choose Open, navigate to the place where you extracted the evaluation version, click OK, and wait for WebStorm to begin and parse all the files. There's a lot of files inside that directory, and some of them aren't necessarily important for WebStorm, so we should tell WebStorm to ignore them for now. So the only things we are interested at the moment are the demos and the tutorials. We select the other directories and mark them for excluded. This makes WebStorm ignore the files inside those directories. There are very large JavaScript files inside, and we don't need it to parse those files. There's a lot of demos inside these directory structures. There's the full source code for those files included. There's always an index HTML and the sources, the JavaScript sources. Now, the best thing about WebStorm is the code completion. You get automatic code completion and API documentation. But you need to configure WebStorm for this accordingly. I'm going to show that to you. We'll go to the settings, to libraries. Here's the libraries, and we define a new library. Click on Add, call it yFiles for HTML. It's a custom library, and it has a definition file. It's inside the IDE support directory, and it's called yFiles API.js. That's it. We can define it as a global library, so we have it available for other projects too. Here it is. Make sure it's enabled. And once we've hit OK, WebStorm is going to index that file and can now provide code completion for us. So if we look at code, we'll get documentation, complete, linked with all information that's available, and of course code completion. Now, off to our first project. I'm going to create a new directory, my first app, and I'm going to insert an HTML file, the index file. Let's call it my first yFiles app. And now what we need to do is first load the CSS that is specific to yFiles. And this is in it's a CSS file, style sheet, and it's located in the lib directory where everything is located. Now if I run the file, I get an empty screen. Of course, that's boring. So I also need to load the yFiles library. It's a JavaScript library, and in this example we're going to use an implementation of the AMD loader require.js to load the files. So the first thing we'll have to do is add the loader itself. There's an implementation part of the package. It's called require.js. And later on, when the site is loaded, we will tell the require implementation where to find the libraries. So we need to specify the base URL relative to this file, which is in the lib directory, because we're going to step one step out and back into the lib. This is where all the yFiles is located. And then we're going to tell it to require the complete yFiles package, which is called yFiles complete. And to get this demo to run, we need to include the license file that's part of the package. So that's in resources, demos, resources, license.js. And once it's loaded, well, let's start by just logging something. So this is going to be an empty page that loads the yFiles library and the license file and the style sheet. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Yeah, which is okay. But let's take a look at the output of the console. We got success, so all of the library files have been loaded already. So now to get started, yFiles is an HTML5 component, and it requires space on your HTML page. And we do that by specifying a div element. We give it a name. Let's call it graph control, and give it some size. So let's say 600 pixels wide and 400 pixels in height. Give it some background so that you can see it. Oh, light gray is nice. And now if we start the page, we see a gray div over here, but of course it's not yet a graph control, it's just the name of the div that's graph control. So instead of logging some useless success over here, we are now going to actually create the graph control component. So let's declare a variable and see where it is. It's in yFiles.canvas.graphControl. Watch the completion. And it's actually in the div called graph control. Now that's all. Let's see what happens. Doesn't look too much different, but well, there's a watermark for the license down here. But if I click it, nothing happens. Well, but as you can see, if I turn the mouse wheel, there's some scroll bars over here. So it's working already, but well, it's still boring. Let's see what we can do with the graph control. The graph control hosts a graph, and with the graph, I can tell it to create a node. Let's remember that node. And I want to interact with it, with a node too, or with the graph. So let's tell it to use an input mode, which handles user input to actually edit the graph. There's graph editor input mode, and that's basically it. Let's see what happens. This is the node that we created programmatically. I can zoom to it. But now that I've added the input mode, I can select the node, resize it, add more nodes to that, add connections, bends, move them around, select, delete, etc. Cool. Now the best thing with yFiles is automatic layout. Let's add this to our example. We'll add a simple button over here. On click, just execute our method layout, call it layout. We need to define that method somewhere. Since I'm just using the global layout over here, and I'm in function scope, I'm going to assign it to the global namespace. And once we are in that method, I can say graph control, and there's this nice method morph layout. I'm going to choose the layout algorithm. Like in this case, I'm going to use organic. I need to specify how fast to morph it. So I need to specify the duration. And there's yFiles system time span. Well, let's take it for like 3 seconds. And then we have an optional callback. Once it's done, we just ignore that for now. We don't need it. And see what happens. There's the button. Now add the graph. Use the duplicate action to create a bigger graph, and let's see what happens. Yeah, it's a nice animation. Here it is. So of course, there's a huge API with yFiles, and of course you're going to make mistakes. Even though you have code completion that tells you what parameters to pass, what types to use, you're going to have to debug. And for this, there's a great script that you should always add to your application. At the very first script that you should add for debugging purposes. And that is, let's do that. It's the script. We'll add the source. It's also in IDE support, and it's called yFiles typeinfo.js, and it adds runtime type information and type checking to the application. So let's see what happens. With this script enabled, I can open the console in the browser and type yFiles debug. And yFiles debug searches for a div in the in the DOM named graph control. It should be spelled like this, and it's just a utility function, and puts the graph control into global variables called gc and graph, and g for graph. So if I say graph clear, I'm directly manipulating the page. Now, what do you get by the runtime type information script? For example, if I make a mistake, like let's say I have two nodes. First node, g create node. Second node, g create node. That's all fine. Now if I create an edge, for example, and I forget to add the second parameter. Of course, an edge always needs two parameters. But let's just try what happens. I get an exception that tells me there's an argument error. I should have passed it 2 arguments instead of 1. Okay, that's nice, but there's more to that. I can actually write yFiles.help, which is a utility function, which allows me to see the signatures and parameter information right inside the browser console. There's one usage where I can just pass it an instance or an object, like for example yFiles help. Let's give me more information about create edge. Now it tells me it's an instant method on yFiles graph iGraph. It's called create edge, and it takes 2 parameters of type inode and returns an iEdge. And there's also a link to the documentation. I can just click it over here, and it loads in this case, the online information, where I get the full information about create edge. So I need to pass it 2 nodes. Okay, great. So let's see what happens if I add the second one over here. Let's just move them apart. So this is N1 and N2. Now if I call that method, I get the edge and no error is being displayed anymore. Of course, there's a lot more you can do, so be sure to check out the complete set of demos. Back to the README. To check out the complete set of demos, it's a huge list. And the source code tutorials, especially the Getting Started tutorial. It's a number of steps that will introduce you into the functionality of the API. Also, be sure to take a look at the Getting Started chapter in the Developer's Guide. It shows how to set up your developer tools, creating your first application, and working with graphs. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your evaluation and get back to our support team if you run into any issues.